Speaking of trade and trade relationships, Canadians are obviously watching this closely from a trade perspective, and they have had concerns about the trade rhetoric on the campaign trail. At the same time, you have a key trade deal between Canada and Europe, which may be on the sidelines. We're starting to watch some rising concerns about that CETA deal perhaps not actually playing out. When it comes to trading partners, who do you think is a better one for Canada, the United States or Europe?
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, nor do I think it's mutually exclusive of the UK, assuming that Brexit goes through. I don't think it's an either or. I think if I were Canada, I would be seeking good trade relations with as many large entities as I possibly could have, because I think at the end of the day that would be in Canada's best interest.
Wilbur.
I also think if you notice Trump's rhetoric, well, he talks a lot about trade, and I think basically is on the right side of the issue. You don't hear him voice huge complaints about Canada, and there's a good reason for that. In the case of the trade between U.S. and Canada, it's relatively much better balanced than is the trade between the U.S. and Mexico, for example. Could you guess what's the cumulative trade deficit that the United States has with Mexico since NAFTA came into effect? Guess what it is?
You tell us.
$1 trillion.
So it's a point that you've made before.
That equals one whole year's economy for the country of Mexico. There's no reason, just because we have a trade agreement, that we should have exported $1 trillion on a trade balance. Plus, there's something like $50 million a year in remittances from Mexican expats in the U.S. back to their families. And I don't begrudge that, but I'm simply saying those are lopsided figures. Prior to NAFTA, the U.S. was running a $4 to $5 billion a year trade surplus with Mexico. Now it's running a $60 billion a year trade deficit. It's not inherent in trade agreements that things become that lopsided. Whereas in case of Canada, Canada also runs a trade surplus with us, but it's much smaller, and it's infinitely smaller as a percentage of the imports and exports. And that's why you don't hear major complaints by the Trump group about the arrangements with Canada. Canada doesn't have the equivalent of the maquiladoras, which are basically set up to deal with some loopholes in the whole NAFTA and WTO arrangements. It's a very different relationship that Mexico has with the U.S. from the one that Canada has. And so I don't think Canada has a lot to fear in the event of a Trump administration.
Mr. Ross, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
This is Wilbur Ross, Chairman and Chief Strategist.
Floridians today, Mr. Thank you. And we will now turn to questions. Mr. Ross.
I am not anti-trade. I am pro-trade, but I'm pro-sensible trade, not pro-trade that is to the disadvantage of the American worker and the American manufacturing community. I think we should provide access to our markets to those countries who play fair, play by the rules, and give everybody a fair chance to compete. Those who do not should not get away with it. They should be punished, and severely. The work that Leo Gerard, the head of the Steelworkers Union, and I did together, Leo believes, and I believe, probably saved 100,000 jobs in America. And frankly, that's the series of events I'm most proud of in my entire career.
It's my understanding that you have agreed to divest the vast majority of your personal holdings and resign from nearly 50 boards and organizations. I believe that's the right thing to do, and it tells me that you are committed to doing the job the right way by placing the public's interest ahead of your own. It's my hope that President Trump will follow your lead and the example that you set.
Strategy Officer at